Jolly good. Well, I'm here with Sue Tibbetts, who came to Sudbury in 1972 to begin the process of bringing comprehensive education to Sudbury. So, could you tell us what existed before you arrived and the story from that point onwards?
Before I came here, there was a girls' high school. There was Woodhall Primary School, Tudor Road Primary School, and North Street Primary School, actually in Sudbury. They took children from when they first entered school until 11, when there was the 11 plus selection. At that point, they either went, if they were boys, to the boys' secondary school, which was in Mill Lane, the boys' grammar school, which was in Christopher Lane, and today is William Wood House. But all girls ended up at the girls' high school in York Road. So the idea of comprehensive education was to get rid of the selection at 11 and give everybody the same chance. So they would all go to, at 13, the Sudbury Upper School.
And when you came to the middle school, it began in the boys' old secondary modern school where St Gregory's is now, 9 years to 11, and from 11 to 13 at the old grammar school, and you arrived teaching 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds?
I started doing 10-year-olds because we actually didn't start at 9 that year. We had an extra year at the top end. This was to filter the new system in. So I started with 10-year-olds in what had been the boys' secondary school. That building was actually pulled down after 1987, and the St Gregory's or North Street School moved down there onto a new site. William Wood House took the boys and girls, boys the first year, from 11 to 30, from 12 to 14.
Did you feel a bit like a pioneer? Was this all quite exciting stuff?
It was my first teaching position, and in a way we hadn't integrated on that side as a middle school. We were still really two schools, the top 2 years of the old primary and the first 2 years of the secondary system.
And was there sort of competition to get some teachers from the grammar school or some teachers from the boys' secondary modern?
A lot of people had been appointed, I think, 2 years before. Obviously the new teachers like myself hadn't. So they'd been selected from the primary schools. My head had come from Woodhall, which had been a new primary school built in Sudbury. And he brought several of his staff with him. A lot of the boys' secondary staff stayed with us, but an awful lot went to, with their head, to the Upland site, which was the girls' high school.
And one of the great changes between then and now was that you had no computers, no interactive whiteboards, and all these things. You taught without these things.
We taught with textbooks. Beta Maths ran all the maths system through in the first 2 years, and SMP came in the last 2 years. The actual whiteboards, of course, was chalkboards. Roller boards were in place in some rooms. Calculators, non-existent. First time we had a course on calculators, I can remember it being an evening course in the Mill Lane site, and it depended on light, and there was a power cut. So all these calculators ceased to function, which didn't please the person leading the course. The first suite of computers we had was in one room. I can't remember the actual name of it, but it was deemed to be complicated under the supervision of one person who happened to be the maths leader. By the time we went to our new site, we were told we were having a new suite of computers, and they were sort of everywhere. 40 years after we started middle schools, when I retired, there were computers in every classroom.
And can you remember, so your first having your own first private computer?
Yes, I can. The first one we had didn't use the internet, didn't use a printer. It was the Commodore. And then I went to an Amstrad, and that wasn't much better for printing. I think the first good system we had, I fell out between scanning and printing at home.
Right. And presumably, initially, when you went online to send an email or access the World Wide Web, which was a time when there wasn't such a thing,
Yes.
It was all terribly slow.
Oh, very slow, and you went through, you dialed up for it really every time. It was costly. You know, no surfing on Wi-Fi, no getting it on your telephone. You missed it. I actually remember the first time we needed to use it abroad and having to find an internet cafe because it was important to get an email back home.
When you say you dialed up for it?
Well, you went through the dialing system on your telephone, so every time you went into the internet it cost you money. Every time you came out and then went back in, you were making another call.
Did you ever find in your teaching career you were having to ask children to explain to you how to use a computer or a mobile telephone?
Mobile telephones, yes. I used to have to get one of my Year 8 pupils to do texting for me because I couldn't do that.
No.
She's now a doctor.
Yeah. Going back to the grammar school, your grammar school, was there any regalia left in there when it became a middle school? Or?
No. The one thing we had still in there, because there were lots of rooms in the grammar school, because it had been the headmaster's house as well, and there were a lot of the military training corps, the army training corps stuff underneath the stage, and we used that when we did evacuation recreation for the pupils and took them to Bures on the train, brought them back in costume, took them to the drill hall. And actually, I think your mother was involved with that actually, as a billeting officer for the day. We had that stuff, but all the rest of it went to the archives in Bury or to the Sudbury Upper School. They tended to claim that they had been in the grammar school and took everything with them.
Yes. The upper school took on the
Yes.
mantle of being.
Yes, but we were a Church of England school because the church didn't want to lose the fact that they were losing top ends of primary schools, and the grammar school had gone, that had church connections, so they linked us in as the church school in the town.
And you think the transition went quite well and everything? I mean, there must have been a few hiccups. It was a huge transformation of education.
The biggest hiccup we had was because we were split site, and we were in the town, we still had to bring children in from the country. So we had to bring in Melford children. We had 2 double-deckers and a single-decker coming from Melford every day.
2 double-deckers?
Yes. Yeah. We had a bus in from Acton, another one from Waldingfield. We had a few come in from Bulmer on Sudbury coaches, which wasn't that reliable. But we had to bring them into the bus area near Mill Lane and then walk them to the grammar school building. Of course, when we moved to Acton Lane, we had a proper bus pull-in,
Yes.
which was better.
Yeah. And in 1987, you all moved, the school moved.
Yes, it was supposed to have gone in 1976 to Melford. The problem was that there wasn't a suitable site found in Melford. And when they reviewed the schools in the 1980s, the area at Acton Lane had been our playing field, which the children had been bused to every week. 4 sessions up there in the freezing cold.
So, yes, did the children walk? Or?
No, we bused them.
Right.
In the days as boys' secondary school, they walked,
Yes.
but in our day it was busing. So two classes went up first thing in the morning. That was the really cold one. Then 2 after break. Then in the afternoon, the same thing again. And again, it happened 2 days, Wednesday and Thursday. Thursday, market day, which was busy in those days, busing through the town, wasn't the best of solutions.
No. So this was Market Day when Market Day really was Market Day?
Yes, yes. And the cattle market was still going in those days. The thing about going to Acton Lane as a school was there was a primary school there which never filled up because the London overspill came to an end. So therefore the Greater London Council had no money to keep that estate being developed. The school wasn't ideal on the split site. The buildings were old, and the review said that they should actually amalgamate all the primary schools into one, into what existed in Woodhall, Tudor and North Street, resite North Street and take us onto one site. Wasn't the best of solutions because we had people like to think they were still sending their children to the old grammar school building, which had kudos. By going up to Acton Lane, it was associated with Springlands Estate.
I'm just going to stop. Do you think we should have someone downstairs asking them not to talk so loudly?
Yeah, I think they've just gone now.
Right, okay. Well, let's carry on then.
Is that all?
Is that all right? We'll carry on. Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, can you close that window, Dom? Are they outside as well? Out by
They were
the...
just by their car, but they've gone in now.
No. It really needs Peter Redmond or someone to be down there asking people to be... Could you just shut that little bit of blind? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Already
Yeah, they want me to count you in again.
Okay.
Stand by, Ashley. Okay. 5 seconds. Come back
5,
to you.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay. About that time, Sue, when the move took place, we also experienced the hurricane of 1987.
Yes, I wasn't actually teaching at that moment. I was on leave, but I do remember it. I remember in the early hours of the morning getting up to get my washing in off the line and wrapping up, thinking October, bound to be freezing cold, going outside, and it was so warm. And the next morning when I drove my husband to work, coming past St Gregory's Church and finding the trees just laying down and suddenly exposing this medieval church to us. Monkey puzzle trees on Melford Road falling into the garages of the houses, and we didn't actually have anything across the road in Melford Road that morning.
Were you off the power?
Yes, and I believe school was shut for several days. The damage they had was limited to the bike sheds having the roofs torn off, and some trees stopping the buses coming through. But yes, we did suffer power loss. I was expecting a delivery that day from Ely, and I got no phone. Phones were off. And eventually the chap got through and he said, "I don't think I'm going to make it today. All the trees are down along the river here."
Wonderful memory, wonderful, a very graphic memory of all the trees down on the croft. Sort of,
Yes, the big oak trees stayed there for years, the trunk, because they couldn't get it across the bridge. But we did have a disaster when we were in Acton Lane School on a very early parents' evening in November, darkness, and Webbs were actually delivering their steam engines that they'd bought, and they were wood-burning engines, I believe, and bringing them through Acton hit the power lines, so we went into blackout. You thought it was bad enough in the old building when we had small huts at the back of Mill Lane. It was sort of isolating you, that you could be stuck out there in the blackout, but in a new building you don't expect that.
And accolades, the International Schools Award, you were proud to talk about.
Yes, we got lots of awards, but I was actively involved with international schools. We linked with our schools in Huxter and Claremont and in Humlebeck in Denmark.
And so this is Sudbury Middle School gaining the International Schools Award.
Yes.
That you were part of.
We actually corresponded with the schools, and Claremont wanted to bring a group over at one point, But it wasn't the school that brought them over from France. It was their, I suppose we describe it like after school's activity group, and they had a special leader for it. So their council and their junior sort of commune council came over. They said, we've linked with All Saints, we want to stay linked with them. So spent a day in school, and then my school council had actually written to Andrew Phillips and said, could we get to the House of Lords? They're going to London for the day. We had a fantastic day in London, sharing their coach, having a tour around London in French, going to the House of Lords. But the most interesting one was coming back, where they had to have a break for a short afternoon tea break, I suppose. We were desperate to get back to Sudbury, but the French wanted their afternoon tea.
Okay, good for the French. And before we leave education, you remember the one of the people from Sudbury Convent, one of the nuns would visit the grammar school.
Yes, because we were a church school, and there were an awful lot of Catholics coming into the area, particularly based in Cornard. There had always been a plan to build a Catholic middle school here in the early days. It then wasn't financially feasible, so eventually all the Catholic children went to the middle school in Bury or just into normal middle schools in the town. But in the early days, we took the Catholic children, and they were the days when they didn't come into assembly. They would not mix in the normal assembly. They had their separate one. And she would come every Friday and do religious education with them.
Yes, and it's a bit of Sudbury's history that until the 1990s, roughly, there was a convent in Sudbury.
Yes.
Where St Joseph's.
That's right. That's right. And those sisters used to do work with the people in the community who couldn't actually cope on their own so easily.
Yes. As a teacher, you must have taught in Sudbury, I hesitate to say this, for
40 years.
40 years.
I actually did 40 years. I saw the middle schools in, and I retired the penultimate year of middle schools, but I did see it out.
Before the next change.
Yes.
And as you walk around Sudbury on a Saturday afternoon, or you go to the supermarket, you're constantly seeing old pupils.
I am, and there are some of them who I've got not only fond memories of, but one of them took me away from school on my retirement.
Very nice. And any achieved really great things that you're particularly proud of as a history lover?
I'm proud of the fact that the school had an environmental club in the early days. Pearl Chatters was an instigator of it, and Anne Devonish, and we did a lot of work on Sudbury Meadows, putting in trees, trees that were meant to screen off the old sewerage works, trees along the meadow side of the footpath near the Mill Hotel. We did lots of work with Adrian Walters and his predecessor for that. It's not only the achievements of the high flyers in the school, but it's also the achievements of the ordinary person who went there, who is just one of them today strives to work with the carnival, and that's great.
Yeah. No, you've helped so many people, and you've given so many people a potential to understand and to live life to the full.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, and your great love history, you're now involved in the Ephemera Archive.
That's right.
So let's just hear something about who started that, how did it begin?
It was started with Andrew Phillips, Lord Phillips Sudbury, and Tony Moore, who decided there was a lot of paper that was thrown away. Programmes, leaflets, tickets, things we now forget about. Too often you go to an airport, you go to anything and you use your mobile phone, paper tickets. So we keep this paper archive of a social history of Sudbury.
Where do you keep it all?
All in the town hall. It's all catalogued. Well, as fast as we can do it. We've got papers of estate agents' details on the sales of properties in the area for the last 60 years, which is incredible because you can see how the buildings have changed, how some buildings have been demolished, like Inkerman Row. We've got the details of those properties.
And things like what was on at the cinema, or
Yes.
who was acting in the Sudbury Dramatic Society.
A cinema programme.
Yes.
You know, the days when you went to cinema and actually got a programme from the Gainsborough Cinema. And a ticket out of the silver machine that came through.
Do you have any photos of the old swimming pool?
Yes.
Because I don't know whether your children, you were taking your children there, but it used to be freezing cold.
It did. I can remember using it in my first years in Sudbury because the pool down Kingfisher actually was officially opened in 1987.
Same as the school.
Yes. Duke of Gloucester came in for that. He flew into Bellevue. Not Bellevue, Delphi.
Yes. And prior to that, you would have to march the children to the old swimming pool.
Yes, Friday mornings was the swimming slot and they had to be walked from the school to the pool, get changed it was only in the summer you could use it,
Yes.
get changed, have their lesson and then go back.
Yes. And for anybody who isn't aware, it was an open swimming pool.
Yes.
And there was a little board outside that if you were really lucky, the temperature of the water got over 60.
And I believe the ladies' changing rooms were actually the old mortuary for the police station, which was in front of that area.
Well, Sue, that's absolutely lovely. I've always thought that teachers make one of the most wonderful contributions to society of anybody. And it's been lovely to chat to you, and thank you for coming in and giving us your memories.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.